to stream. Oh, there we go. I think it's working. Okay, we're good. So we're live on Instagram. We are live on YouTube. Okay.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome to Conscious Coffee. I'm Tim. This is my YouTube account and Instagram for Selfless Awakening. Thanks for stopping in and joining us. If you have any comments you want to share about what we're talking about, join in. If you're watching us on YouTube or on Instagram, we're happy to read what you say. I can see the phone. Jessie can't see it from here.
I can't see it.
So I'll read comments as we go. And what we're doing here, the whole idea of this is that it's all about us talking about mindfulness, talking about things from a place of evolution of human consciousness, the sort of highest good. What's the metaphysical truth about, looking at things from that filter, and just, this is all about us having something that we do together that we can look forward to really practice what we preach, to talk about this stuff because we believe in it so much. So hello. I think I saw. Do you know something about Kundalini? Do we know anything about Kundalini? That was a question we have. Do you know anything about Kundalini?
What about Kundalini?
I don't know. There was a question thrown at us. Well, I mean, as far as yoga, that's a yoga question. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that? I'm not sure we have much for you on that. Jessie and I are not super big yoga practitioners, although we super support people that do yoga, but it's not something that we practice a whole lot right now. As far as Kundalini, though, I know isn't that the fire, like building fire up? Isn't Kundalini mean like
rising?
Fire? I think so. Yeah. But no, I don't really practice that kind of stuff. Although I do some breathing things that activate like fire breath stuff like that. But yeah, I'm not going to talk anymore about that because I'm out of my realm already, way too far. But today what we have scripted for our morning to talk about is the topic of being triggered, how to become untriggered if you are triggered, what it means to be triggered, and which is a really nice tether to talking about Dave Chappelle's last comedy special, The Closer, which if you read any news around the way that special was received, there definitely were some people that were triggered by that special, for sure. Jessie and I are big fans of comedy, and I personally believe that comedy is it has a lot to do with awakening, because it has a lot to do with the commentary on things that maybe are not, things that are maybe off in society, or unique perspectives on society. And a lot of times awakening has to do with that, with this redefining things from a whole new mindset that you thought were one way, and then all of a sudden as you awaken you start to see things completely different. So comedy is a really cool place where awakening is practiced, for sure. And so we will love comedy. We go out to comedy frequently, and we did watch The Closer, and we have some thoughts on it. We want to look at it from a mindset of from a metaphysical standpoint, like what's the highest good in society? How could this video be of service to the collective consciousness, or is it not of service to the collective consciousness? And that's kind of what we thought we'd explore a little bit. And as always, this is our second podcast, second one together officially. We're doing in a schedule. We want to do a little reading from something and then get into the talk. And today we have the book Universal Human by Gary Zukav, and we thought we'd just read a little passage. Neither of us have read this book yet. We just picked it up, I think last weekend, maybe. Was that right?
Last week, yes.
Last week, yeah. So we thought we'd just read a little passage from it, and then as we go down the road, I think we might do a little more involved talk, because we're going to read this. Jessie and I are going to read this book together. So let me just see. There's one more comment here. We have another question on someone wanting to know about DMT breathing. It's interesting. Let me talk about that for just a quick second, because that's a good one. And I'm super big into the breathing stuff. As far as DMT breathing goes, I mean, what I would assume that that's getting to is getting to when we talk about the Wim Hof method. There's a moment in the breathing where you can really trigger like visuals, almost like a psychedelic experience. And I will just say simply about that topic. I'm not going to go into it much more than just saying breathing is an incredible hack into your mind, into the deeper parts of yourself, into the many of the transcendent experiences that you can have through psychedelics. I believe you can have them through breathing techniques and meditation techniques. So if you're wondering about DMT breathing, really my recommendation is look into the Tumo monks and Wim Hof. Wim Hof method is basically a distillation and extracting the spirituality out of what the Tumo monks practice, and that's going to lead to all of those deep experiences of breathing. So I would highly recommend checking that out if that's something curious to you. But I'll be talking more about Wim Hof and breathing stuff later in later episodes for sure. But okay, all right. So do you want me to read from it, or would you like to read? What would you like to do?
I'll start.
You'll start. Okay, great. And by the way, this is Jessie. This is my partner, my romantic partner, my spiritual partner, my buddy.
Wow.
We always joke about you're my best friend, and it feels kind of silly to say that's little secrets into our relationship. I'm going to fix your mic while you're talking.
Sure. Okay. So we're just going to read the first page of Universal Human. Gary Zukav is also the author of The Seed of the Soul. And so this is just the welcome, the prelude. Welcome to this book. I'm so happy you're joining me in it. This book will bring your attention to the transformation of human consciousness that is happening so that you can understand it and use it to create a life of more joy and less pain. It will give you opportunities to experiment with a road toward meaning and fulfillment and purpose and joy, but you must use these opportunities in order to benefit from them. This road is challenging like none before and rewarding like none before. This road is the path you are walking. It is your life, and a new consciousness is now illuminating in new and different ways the opportunities and challenges it brings you. That new consciousness is the new consciousness. The old human consciousness evolved over thousands of millennia. The new human consciousness is emerging within a few generations. This book shows you how to apply the new human consciousness to your life. Should I go on or should I pause?
We can stop there. I guess that's a good place to. I have some things that popped out. Did anything pop out from your mind in reading that to talk about?
Well, it seems very similar to the way he began The Seed of the Soul, where he talked about the multisensory humans
Right.
versus the human beings who operate believing only in five senses,
Right.
insofar as he's sort of delineating between the old and the new, which is something that Michael Beckwith recently, or at least it recently came up on my YouTube feed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how recent it is. But I saw a video with him and Lewis Howes where he was talking about something similar, which is the bringing forth of a new consciousness.
Right.
This is something that Eckhart Tolle talks about. Marianne Williamson's been talking about it. So he sort of, this preface is similar to The Seed of the Soul, in that he's really setting us up for the evolution of humanity, and that we are in a great time of awakening and we are going through this evolution, and that this book is going to give us the tools for that.
Right.
But it's something that many teachers address and that I also believe and feel.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I mean, it makes me think about makes me think of the word duality and non-duality a lot. And in the awakening process, or in the journey, there's a feeling of, as you awaken, this sort of stepping out of something, stepping out of what you were before and becoming something new. And it really feels like that. And it feels like people that are doing that feel like you have more of a kinship with them when that's happening to you, and people who are not going through that feel like they're separate in some way. They feel different than how you're feeling, and that's why there's this, so much talk in mindfulness and spiritual. A new earth is kind of like the same way I, as an individual, can feel a newness in my awakening, where I feel not only like I feel like I'm in my regular life, I'm in my day to day of my life experience, but for some reason I'm experiencing it differently. I'm more aware of my mind, and I'm aware of the labeling mechanisms in my mind. I'm aware of the feelings that are being evoked from a situation as it's happening, as opposed to later on in the day or the week or what, or sometime in your life, having an awareness of, oh, I understand now why I felt that way. You have so much more information about yourself, and there's this feeling of almost duality of there's and the thing is, it's not so like I've awakened and now I'm aware of everything all the time. It's not like that at all. It's like when you awaken, you flicker, you go in and out, and so you're pretending you're a person, and you're caught up in the story, and then you pop out, and this idea of there being a collective experience of that happening, that it's not just individuals like you and I who are having awarenesses of ourselves that are popping open. It's also this idea of it happening on a collective level. And that's one of the most exciting parts about doing a live stream like this, is that we get to wake each other up without being in the physical presence of one another. And that's one of the most powerful parts of the social media right now, and being connected in this way, is we can wake each other up faster. And that's a huge part of why I do this and why we're committed to this. And so I love Gary Zukav is beautiful. I'm so excited for us to read this book. And, and I have to say one thing too, is I feel sometimes like, we hear they all say the same things in some ways with little different twists on them, but it's always it all comes back to feeling sometimes like the same thing. It's all these messages of awakening with a new spin on it. And I like to read books, even though I've experienced awakening in a lot of different books that talk about it. I still like to read books that talk about it over and over, just because it helps me help people in talking about it. And so, I'm excited to read this with you. It'll be fun.
Mhm.
Great. And this whole idea of becoming present to yourself, becoming aware of your patterns of thinking and behavior. That's a nice segue into the topic of becoming triggered. And I thought, would you talk a little bit about what it means to be triggered, and what that concept is? I mean, I think we all have an idea of it, but let's kind of look at it just let's define it, I guess, so we can talk about it.
Sure. So, being triggered is when something happens that pokes at your pain body and brings up a reaction in you that is so strong that it is not directly correlated to the experience, but it's correlated to your past. It triggers a pain that stems from your past, and it pokes at that pain so that the pain you're experiencing comes up like a rush of pain or fear or anxiety or sadness, or however it manifests is irrelevant. It could be anger, it could be, loneliness, it could be a fear of abandonment. And so when that pain comes up, your ego thinks that it is because of the situation in the moment, but it's really just something in the moment has triggered, hence the term, a pain that's much heavier and that's rooted in something from your past. And when that button is pushed, you go back to uh the experience of feeling that for the first time when you were younger. So for example, let's say you felt abandoned by your father, let's pretend. And then as an adult, you manifest a partner who goes on business trips all the time, and when they leave, maybe you can't get a hold of them one night. They're, at a business meeting, and your reaction is overblown. Like, all of a sudden you feel a pain and anxiety, like, oh my God, what's going on? And you've been triggered, and it looks in the moment like it's about your partner and their business trip. But what it really is it's just that experience is bringing you back to the pain you felt when your father abandoned you.
Right.
And so you tend to react in a way that feels much more overblown than the situation merits, because it's bringing up that painful memory.
Right. Right. So, yeah. So then in this way, we're going to talk about it as it's an awakening. It's like an irrational emotional
Mhm.
reaction to something that shouldn't, a seemingly small thing that triggers a bigger emotional
Mhm.
reaction.
And it's a feeling too of unconsciousness, because it feels heavier, it feels denser, it feels like it sucks you in a little bit more. So
Right.
the likelihood of your going unconscious and identifying with the emotion rather than responding
Right.
mindfully, it feels harder
Right.
when you're triggered.
Yep.
So it's not like, oh, I'm in traffic and I'm annoyed, but I'm going to be present and think thoughts of gratitude. And,
Yeah.
it feels like it's harder to come back to consciousness, to
Right.
come back to love.
Yep. Yeah. So, and I think that we all experience that in so many ways. And I think that well, let me ask you this question. Are there any times where you feel it's appropriate, where it's justified to be triggered?
Well, I think that one of the main purposes of a holy relationship, or whether it's romantic or otherwise, a very intimate relationship, is to trigger you for the purpose of healing that pain.
Right.
And so, for example, the universe, let's say you do manifest a partner who goes on these business trips, you manifested that partner so that you could that pain could come up, so that you could heal it together. And so
Right.
it's not that the triggering is justifiable, it's just that you will continue to manifest experiences that trigger you until you heal that core wound,
Right.
and you master that core wound. And so one of the reasons why, especially in romantic relationships, people find that they keep manifesting the same problem over and over and over again, and the reason is because we're unconsciously trying to heal our childhood wounds.
Right.
And so we manifest it. And so it's an opportunity, triggering really is just an opportunity to heal that pain, to step out of identification with it, and to lessen its power over you.
Right.
So in that way, it's a beautiful thing. It's painful to go through,
Yeah.
but it's
Right. Yeah. And I mean, in thinking about, you mentioned the word pain body, and I'm not, some people that are tuning in with us may not know that word, or holy
Mhm,
relationship, or, and I think maybe just kind of looking at that a little bit
mhm.
might be good. And this idea of pain body has to do with Eckhart Tolle. We always have said Tolle for years. Eckhart Tolle. That was the first place where I heard the word. I think he may have created that language.
He
I'm not sure.
did.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. And this idea of pain body is this idea that you're carrying around this, really, if it's like an entity of pain that in the right moments rears its head. And the weight and the pain was, I think he says it's a collective thing that we all have because of the history of humanity and all, and that it can be we can awaken this pain through traumatic experience, remembering, or things that remind us of traumatic experiences in our past. And so it's interesting that, we spend a lot of our lives on this awakening journey, healing triggers from pre 8 years old or something like that, pre 10 years old. And it's a fascinating part of this journey, that side of it. But and that's where the whole idea of pain becomes less of a we get so good bad, is pain good or bad, but pain just becomes an indicator of healing needed to be done. And so when I think about that, as far as like, you know when this happens, what do we do, and is there anything we can do? Sometimes I think, even as we're awakening, we can get triggered. We could spend the most blissful morning out in the backyard, zenned out, in a transcendent state. There's no thoughts in between, the birds chirping, you feel at one with everything, and then pick up your phone, and instantly you're back in the matrix. You're freaking out, the heart's racing, the hands get clammy, it's stress, like that can happen still as you awaken. And what can easily happen in those situations is your spiritual ego starts judging you for that. Like, I thought I shouldn't be responding to being triggered. And when I think about processes that have actually worked to help me not be as triggerable, I would have to say, without a doubt, it's the no thought practice throughout the day of when the more that I spend time in stillness, quieting the voice in my head, the process that I use in the morning, then I am more likely, when I'm triggered, to not act out of that emotion and respond to whoever I'm triggered with in a triggered way. Because I think that's really what would be the metric to decide on how good we're doing at being triggered. I think it's going to be, when we were triggered, were we identified with it, or were we able to witness it and say, I'm really triggered right now. I want to rip your head off. I've got a lot of negative thoughts in my head that I'm not saying right now. I think I should take a step back and breathe. Like, if we get to a place where we can, like, that seems to be that's like a next level. If you can get to that place, and that's a hard place to get to. And that's kind of what I think about as far as like the techniques, like, just the more you practice not being identified with the voice in your head, the more likely you are to not be triggered in a way that causes wreckage after. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you're triggered, and it usually happens in a romantic relationship or in a familial relationship, it's usually with the people you love the most who
Yep.
bring up the most emotional turmoil in you.
Mhm.
Like, if a stranger says something that upsets you, it's less upsetting than if your sister said something
Right.
that upsets you. And so I think that when we're triggered, we act in a way that's out of accordance with our best self.
Right.
It brings up the most fearful version of ourselves. It brings up the most stress, the most sadness, the most anger. It brings up a feeling of feeling unsafe or unloved,
Yeah.
or the situation really makes you feel horrible. It feels like that.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, where you're feeling such intense emotions, to be able to create a little space between yourself and that emotion, so that you don't say anything you can't take back,
Yeah.
or you don't make a choice from that state, so that you don't do something that you regret. It's like those are the moments where you can say something that, even if you then later apologize for,
Yeah.
it leaves sort of marks in your relationships.
Right.
And so why it's so important at those moments to create a little bit of space is so that you don't have remorse after the fact, or create, as you say, wreckage in your
Right.
life. You get triggered, and then all of a sudden you go off on your best friend and you ruin the relationship.
Right.
And then you come back to consciousness, and you're like, well, I couldn't control it. It's
Yeah.
almost like verbal diarrhea. Like, you
Right.
lost control of yourself in
Yep.
that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And And I think what's really important to remember, because I think that one of the hardest parts is it's going to happen. Like, as soon as you start having these transcendent experiences of meditating and feeling at peace with yourself and at one with, you're starting to feel okay, like truly okay with everything, which is a byproduct of the process, that you can feel that way and then not feel that way. And don't beat yourself up in the duality of that, in the in and out, of awakening. It's so important to give yourself, yeah, because I have to say, one of the ways we stay triggerable is by beating ourselves up for being triggerable, the honoring of like, oh, this has happened, I'm going to come out of it. Because I really don't believe that you can fix being triggered by in the moment of being triggered. I don't. If you're triggered, you're triggered. Your heart's racing, you're off the rails, you're reactive, you're a trapped animal, basically, when you're triggered. And until you have the meta awareness of, oh my God, I'm triggered. The first moment of not being triggered is the awareness that I am triggered. And you can't really get there through some, like, when you're triggered, you're not pinching yourself to wake up from being triggered. You're triggered. So the way I think we fix the being triggered is in our morning practices. Like, I really do. It's the same idea with lucid dreaming, where one of the techniques they use to help you lucid dream is you put a red X on the back of your hand. And then throughout the day, every time you look at the red X, you remind yourself, am I awake or am I dreaming? You ask yourself that question. And in that respect, that's like it's a reminder to wake up, that you can't, when you're asleep, wake up because you're asleep. So the way we can have less triggers is by being proactive in setting moments, I call them like, I had this concept that I talked about a couple years ago, meditation. I think I called them way stations, right?
You did.
Meditation way station. I think I had a video on that, where you set up for yourself, like, the morning you have one, afternoon have one, evening have one, where you're just checking in and doing some deep self-awareness processy stuff, just so that because then it's like you've had 3 times in the day that you became present to yourself as the awareness, not as the voice in the head. And that just helps you step out of it. One other thing I can say about a process that has helped me with not being with getting not triggered, and I don't know how I installed it, but it may just have been through this morning practice stuff. But if the level of intensity of emotional reaction to something crosses a certain line, like I have a little thermometer in my emotional center or something, and if my emotions get too high in any given situation, I pop out. I become aware of, whoa, I'm triggered. Like, wow, I'm upset right now. Look at this, is interesting. And it's weird because most of the time what happens, because it's relatively novel for me to be at a level of being triggered that I have to take a breath and look at it. Like, it's not common. I don't know what frequency I would guess at, but every few months, maybe it would happen in my life right now. And I may be off a little here and there on that, but I think it's pretty close. It's not a daily, weekly thing. And I can say that, what the hell was I going to say? I think I just totally spaced. I was tangented too far.
You started with you pop out when you get
Right.
triggered, or
Oh yeah. So yeah, this this release valve got installed somewhere, where as soon as I have this big emotion, I just kind of completely eject myself. And I think part of it is I had a weird reframing of this whole idea come into my mind. This idea of, what if it was a fun opportunity when I'm triggered to practice not being triggered? Like, and I would have this idea of, like, every time I get triggered, I want to practice I'm going to breathe and create space around the emotional reaction. And I made a few years ago, I made a little game out of it. And it doesn't happen all the time. I usually become aware of it, or I always become aware of it. But sometimes it becomes almost fun. It's like, ooh, I'm triggered. Now I get a chance to let's see if how well I do on this time. It's almost like a little game for myself or something. And as soon as any thought like that pops in my mind, I'm completely not triggered because now I'm kind of curious. If I can get curious about my emotional reaction, it no longer has power over me. It's something I'm studying, And I don't know. I think that's more of a reframing thing. I think that the way you would install that into your mindfulness practice would be to do affirmation work on it. Something like in the morning after you've done your morning meditating, saying, I'm so thankful that every time that I get triggered, I pop out and wake up, and it feels so good to be awake. It feels so good to be present that I know that no matter what my emotional reaction is, I can feel at peace with it. And then just kind of just practicing that thought so that when it happens, you may be more likely to have that thought occur in the triggered moment. But again, it's kind of like, I plan on waking up at 2 a.m. It's like, okay, I'll try, but so that's kind of what I think about with being triggered. Do you have anything else on being triggered to throw in there?
Yeah, I think that it's, the way that I think about it sometimes is the universe created me, gave me a certain personality construct, put me through certain experiences in my life that brought forth those triggers.
Right.
And so I always think about it as, God knows everything that's going to set me off. There's a path laid out for my healing. There's a path laid out for, A Course in Miracles says the script is already written.
Right.
And so there's nothing I can do to mess it up or to get it wrong. This isn't some test that I need to pass or, something that I can fail.
Right.
It's something I think to be gentle with myself and
Yep.
to have grace and to trust that, I'm, to use Christian language, I'm on the potter's wheel.
Right.
So I'm being remade in every moment, and I don't need to be perfect. I'm not here to prove how conscious I am. If I do identify with an emotion and get triggered, it's part of the process. It's part of awakening. It's part of my journey. I'm being shaped and remade in the image of God,
Right.
and just keep on moving, that it's all the script is written.
Yeah.
Everything I say, everything I do, every reaction I have, even that is perfect. Even that is all part of the journey.
Right. Yeah. I am okay with myself that I am triggered sometimes. Right. I'm okay with that. Sometimes when I am triggered, I judge myself for being triggered.
Right.
It's like, I'm okay with my ego and my spiritual ego.
Right.
Going
It's
off
all
sometimes.
part of the process.
Exactly.
It's all part of the journey.
Yeah. Good. Well, that segues nicely into talking about being triggered. Not really. Into being triggered by Dave Chappelle.
That segues into Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle. Yeah.
Not sure how, but
so, all right. Yeah. So the closer, man. Dave Chappelle, man. So where do we start? This is one of those things where on one hand, I was thinking a little bit about it. Like, how do we talk about this? It feels like anybody who talks about this gets ripped apart online. Thankfully, I don't know if that many people are interested in hearing, in the mindfulness world we've curated. I don't think it's that big of a
take on Dave Chappelle.
Yeah. But seriously though, spiritual take on the metaphysical. Is this evolution? Is what he's doing? Well, first of all, I want to talk about the transgender movement and my feeling about it as a sign of awakening in general. I think that's one thing to talk about there. Because I did an Instagram post about it. I can't remember if I did a YouTube video or not, but it's something I've thought about a lot, that, this idea of taking your gender or of, in awakening, what happens with awakening, we step out of playing the roles, thinking the thoughts, being the people that we were before, and we reinvent ourselves to be something new. We Something new is born out of the awareness of what we were before as we become present to it from the true self, which is the awareness. As we awaken, one of the biggest things we learn is the difference between true self and, in Buddhists, that's lesser self, smaller self, higher self, lower self, lesser self or lower. I can't remember. Leave in the comment if you know that. I forgot. I'm sure somebody knows out there. So this idea of you start to feel like you identify as a different person's the wrong word. You are something else. You can sit there and not have the voice in the head going, which is who you thought you were before, and feel awareness, like you are just witnessing the inside of your head and your eyes, and that's who you are, as the witness. So as you start having these experiences, you start looking at this avatar self, this construct, Tim, the man Tim. He is 45, a dad, your partner, musician, like all of these labels. He's straight, like he likes women. And those are all choices. Now, as I awaken, the question is are there, like, as I awaken and become aware of those patterns in myself, those ways of thinking, can I rewrite them? Are there some parts of me that are not rewritable? Because I do have to say, as far as the sexuality side of it, me liking women, I could still go experiment with some alternatives. And I could, as an awakened person, probably find a way to make some fun out of that if I wanted to. I could redefine lots of things about myself. Now, then it comes down to the question of, well, is there still an authenticity to being yourself? I guess that's something I do think about sometimes. This idea of, is there an authenticity to being yourself as you awaken? Or is it just something that is all redefinable completely? Like as you awaken, be like, well, because there are some people that completely change their skin. Like people that have had cat ears put on instead of regular ears, and they put their cheeks up, and they have even whiskers. Like people go really far into redefining their avatars. I wouldn't necessarily say all of those situations are in an awakened state. It's that someone became so present that their intuitive guidance said, I now want to be a cat, or I want to completely change myself into a new person. I think, but that being said, though, I think that it's happening in society, whether the person awakening who's changing their gender or changing their look or changing their identity to go against what is normal in society, whether or not they are aware of themselves as awareness themselves when it's occurring, I still think it's a sign of awakening, because it's happening in society more and more. This thing of where people are kind of, even unconscious people are going, wait a minute, I don't feel like I need to be the same roles everybody's playing. In fact, I don't think I want to. Like, desires are being openly served more than they were before. And I guess I'm curious of that particular part of it. This question for you, what your thoughts are on it. Do you feel that the way that gender diversity is happening in society is a sign of awakening? I guess let me start there with you. I don't even know your thoughts on that, honestly.
Well, I know you've done videos and you've spoken more about it,
Yeah.
about it being a sign of the awakening. I think for sure it could be a sign of the awakening.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then from there, it's like this idea of we're redefining who we are in society, where society is slowly changing to accept that that's happening. And then at the same time, as with any changes in society, there's pushback, there's resistance to the change, there's criticisms of it, and then there's trying to sort of right the ship. And and I think about with Dave Chapelle and the special, like what do you think he was trying to say? Like, how would you sum up? What are your thoughts on what he was actually trying to say? Do you have what his point he was trying to make, overall arching point was?
Well, I think there were many
Yeah.
points. Many, many, many
You want to talk
points.
about those a little bit? Would you put language to them?
Sure.
Yeah. If you feel, I mean, I know we're talking about some,
Sure.
it's kind of controversial a little.
I'm just curious about the time, but
Oh,
yes.
okay. All right. Are we going over in time a little bit? Okay.
There's so much to the special. He was talking about, I mean, one point he made was that, you know, you're in one of the joke, he was talking about how gay people are gay and offended by certain behaviors or actions until the police come, and then they're white. So that gender and sexual preferences take a back seat to racial issues. You know, I mean, there was a lot.
Yeah.
There's so much. I don't necessarily feel like I need to sum up
Yeah.
all of the social commentary he was making.
I think that was the big one, though.
But I think there was so many points he was making that was from his opinion that I'm not saying I support or don't support. It was just a treasure trove of basically social commentary. This is his comments on what's going on in terms of racism, sexism, gender. You know, it's his perspective.
Yeah. And where my mind goes to it, because you're looking at it from a metaphysical standpoint. We're looking at it not from a trying to trigger groups of people to get more egoically reactive to one another. We're looking at it from a kind of zoomed out place and sort of, you know, what's really going on here. And when I think about what's really going on here in that special, it's this idea of being identified with groups, group identification, egoic identification in group size. We have so many identities that we hold on to, and now we're so much more tribal online than we were before. And so when we think about what you just said there, this idea of Dave Chappelle's big sort of, I mean, literally the show is called The Closer. And what was his closer? His closer was, he was saying to the LGBTQ trans community, they were criticizing him for punching down on them. You know, there's this whole idea in comedy of you're supposed to punch up, you're supposed to criticize people who are in a better position in life than you are, and you don't punch down at people who are in a worse position in life. And the transgender community, there was some criticism of Dave Chappelle that he was triggered around or playing triggered for his character, which I think is more what's happening. And he was talking about how they were saying he was punching down on them. And then his closer was, stop punching down on me, is basically what he was saying. And so if we look at that, what's going on here? We've got a group of people identified as the group. And then we got another guy who's speaking for another group. It's transgender versus African American identities. Those two groups, these macro groups of identity, and right there, that's ego. That's collective ego. That's, you know, whether if I'm identified with a label and you're identified with a label, and feathers are ruffled because of our identities with our labels, and we're going off on each other, then that's egoic identity. It ties into being triggered, the same thing. So this is what we're really talking about here, is being triggered on a collective level, like collective groups of people being triggered against other collective groups of people. And that historically has been a pretty rough place to be when that happens. And so from an awakening standpoint, this whole thing is kind of ridiculous, truly. Like the whole, you said this, you're punching up, I'm punching down. No, how dare you say we need, like, I had to be honest, the whole thing is a little, it's a little childish, honestly. I had to say that. Like, as we awaken, we're going to step out of this whole thing. And maybe we'll keep it around a little bit, I would imagine, for entertainment, I guess. But right now, it's not. It feels like sometimes with Dave Chapelle, he has an awareness of what it felt like to me in that special. What he was going for was to try to cancel himself. He had the C. There was that big C up there. It was closer. He was going off in a way to try to provoke a debate, a reaction, and he certainly did. And so, on one level, this conversation I think that we're having is hugely evolutionary. It's, we're looking like this amazing that it's become, all of these things are happening from where they were 50 to 100 years ago. Society, like racially, our society was a hot mess not that long ago. And now we're talking about LGBTQ, trans community, and African American communities, both who were completely suppressed not too long ago, now having conversations about equality and representation and fairness and like holy evolution. That's amazingly evolutionary that that's happening. And on another level, the next level of awakening is going to be stepping out of this game. Like, there's so much more to life than arguing back and forth about things like this. Like, that's the point. It's such a waste of time. But here's where we are, and it's where we're waking up from, and that's okay. And so on one level it is evolutionary, and on another level we're moving out of it. And that's really, really how I think about it. And I do feel that how much compassion was there from either side with it? Not a lot. Like, this hasn't been a compassionate thing, this whole experience, that watching the Dave Chappelle thing. But has it been good for society or an evolution? I think it has. Like, I think that this talk is out there and that things are happening, things are moving from it. I do think that there is. Now, I don't know if there are, some people are talking about negative repercussions coming inside of transgender communities from things that he said, and that it's literally coming on their doorstep. Now, I don't know. I definitely have compassion for that. But it's a really exciting time where lots of rapid change is happening in society. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on it, whether it's evolution or not, or just kind of, leave it there? Okay. Well, all right. So that's enough about that topic. I think I've talked about it enough. I mean, I do feel it was a provocative special nonetheless. And if you are feeling triggered by it, my encouragement would be to spend some time and look at what it is about it that is triggering you. And if you have any thoughts on it, please share in the comments if you're watching this on replay. Because this is, I like the idea of looking at things from a metaphysical standpoint, from a zoomed out standpoint. That's where so much of the relief I feel happens for me and for all of us, if we can take a step back and not look at things as so serious. So much of that. And that's one of the best things. That's why we love comedy so much, is it helps us see things from a place of levity. And that's everything. Like, that half of awakening is detaching from the seriousness of the drama, So that's my thoughts on that. But anyway, thanks for stopping by if you did. And if you're watching this on replay, please, leave some comments and some notes about what you thought about what we talked about here. And we're going to talk more. We're going to keep doing these and talking mindfulness. If you have any topics or ideas you'd like to hear us talk about, don't hesitate to leave a little comment. And we will see you at our next video. Again, I'm Tim Welch.
I'm Jessie.
Jessie, you can check out Jessie's content and her writing at rebelhippiesoul.com. And I'm here on Instagram, on YouTube, on Selfless Awakening. See you later. Have a nice rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.